It was early in the morning, and Captain James Caldwell was enjoying his usual ritual, sipping his coffee in the quiet of the bridge as the Halcyon tide sailed steadily across the open ocean. The massive cargo ship, with its experienced crew and well-oiled operations, was on a 40-day journey from Boston to Rotterdam. The sea was calm, the skies clear, everything was as expected. A textbook voyage. The only thing that broke the silence was the soft hum of the ship's engines and the gentle swaying of the ocean beneath. As Caldwell took another sip of coffee, he reviewed the day's course on the digital map. No deviations, no obstacles in sight. They were still far from the shipping lanes, traveling past Greenland, heading toward Europe, where they would dock in less than 3 weeks. The mood on board was as calm as the waters themselves. The crew was efficient, the journey routine. But then something unexpected broke the rhythm of the day, something that would change everything. The first mate was the first to notice. A faint beep came from the radar screen, a new blip flickering in the distance. Caldwell frowned and leaned in to zoom in on the display. They were far from any major shipping routes, and no vessels were scheduled to cross their path. This was odd. What could that be? He muttered under his breath, his curiosity piqued. As he turned to address the crew, another call came from a lookout near the bridge. "Captain, I see something on the horizon." The words hit Caldwell like a sudden chill. He walked over to the window and peered out into the distance. At first, it was nothing but a faint dot, barely visible against the shimmering ocean. It was too far to make out any details, but the longer he looked, the more distinct it became. The small vessel was moving toward them, uncomfortably close. Rodriguez, the first mate, grabbed a pair of binoculars and focused them on the approaching boat. "It's small," he said slowly. "Probably a fishing boat." Caldwell was already shaking his head. "No, it's too far out. They can't possibly be this far from shore." The situation wasn't making sense, and it only became stranger with every passing second. The ship was alone in the vast expanse of water. No other vessels were nearby. The boat grew larger, moving closer without any sign of slowing down. Crew members gathered near the railing, straining their eyes to get a better look. Caldwell and Rodriguez lifted their binoculars again, now able to make out more details. The boat was unmistakably a fishing vessel, but something was off. It was moving in a straight line toward them, with no signs of deviation, as if it had no regard for the ship's course. "I think it's lost," one of the younger deckhands joked nervously. Another added, "Maybe they need help." It seemed like a reasonable assumption. After all, small boats could sometimes suffer mechanical failure, stranding their crews in the middle of the ocean. But something about this situation didn't feel right to Caldwell. "Let's see what happens," he said, his voice steady, though a bead of sweat had formed on his forehead. The ship's radar continued to beep more urgently as the boat drew closer. Minutes passed, and the boat was now close enough to make out distinct features: the white captain's wheelhouse, the black border around its base. It appeared to be a fishing vessel, but it didn't act like one. The boat didn't alter its course, continuing to move straight toward them. The hairs on the back of Caldwell's neck stood up. "What's going on here?" he muttered under his breath. Then, without warning, the small boat rammed the side of the Halcyon tide with a jarring crunch. The impact sent a shockwave through the steel hull, rattling the crew and throwing several of them off balance. They scrambled for support as the ship groaned under the pressure. The smaller vessel, however, was in far worse condition. Its rubber bumper was torn and pieces of wood splintered off. It was clear it had sustained serious damage. But instead of drifting away, it simply stayed pressed against the cargo ship's hull. For a moment, there was an eerie stillness. Then the smaller boat revved its engine and struck the Halcyon tide again. The second impact sent another shiver down Caldwell's spine. The repeated motion was unsettling. Boats didn't act like this on their own. There had to be a reason, and it wasn't something as simple as a mechanical failure. "We need to check it out," Rodriguez said, his voice calm but serious. Caldwell nodded in agreement. Both men geared up and descended the slick metal ladder that led to the small fishing boat. When they reached the cockpit, Caldwell shoved open the door. Inside there was nothing, no crew, no signs of a struggle, just silence. The engine hummed softly in the background, Rodriguez's eyes scanned the cockpit, and that's when they noticed something strange. A thick metal pipe was bolted to the floor connected to the wheel, forcing the boat to maintain a straight heading. Caldwell examined it closely. "This isn't an accident," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This wasn't drifting. It was sent here deliberately." Rodriguez crouched beside the wheel and spotted something tucked underneath. It was a scrap of paper, torn and yellowed with age. He carefully pulled it free and read the words aloud. "I am Captain Argyle Johnson. This ship is our last hope. I rigged it to find help out at sea. If you find this, please help us. P.S. Beware of the mines." The message sent a cold shiver down Caldwell's spine. He exchanged a look with Rodriguez. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a distress call. Desperate but unclear. Mines? What did that mean? Caldwell's mind raced as he thought through the possibilities. One thing was clear, they couldn't ignore this. "We need to find the crew," Caldwell said, his voice steady but urgent. They had to get to the bottom of this. Back aboard the Halcyon Tide, Caldwell gathered the crew and began to formulate a plan. They studied the surrounding waters, using the map they had on board to trace their position. Greenland had been on their left last night, but now they were deep in the open ocean. Using a compass, Caldwell drew a 50-mile radius around their location. Only one landmass appeared, a small island roughly 40 miles back. "That's it," Rodriguez said, his voice filled with the same mixture of uncertainty and resolve that gripped Caldwell. Without hesitation, Caldwell gave the order to reverse course. They would head toward the island and find out what had happened. The cargo ship wasn't built for speed, but they pushed it hard, eager to reach the island quickly. It took them 3.5 hours, but when the radar finally lit up with the sight of land, the crew let out a collective cheer, but that cheer was short-lived. As the island appeared on the radar, hundreds of red dots began to light up around it, forming a perimeter of mines surrounding the island. The situation had just turned much more dangerous. "Those must be the mines," Rodriguez muttered, his face grim. Caldwell knew that this wasn't just a rescue mission, it had become something much bigger. Caldwell's heart raced as he looked at the radar. The island was now surrounded by hundreds of red dots, mines, and not just a few. The ship's route was blocked. The crew had no choice but to get closer to the island by boat. "We can't risk getting any closer by ship," Caldwell muttered, staring at the dangerous perimeter. "We'll use the lifeboat." He selected 8 crew members, including himself and Rodriguez, to board the smaller boat. No one voiced their fears aloud, but the tension was palpable. The thought of navigating through a minefield was terrifying. Some mines were floating on the surface, visible and easy to avoid, but others were submerged, undetectable by sight alone. It was a delicate operation, but they had no choice. The lifeboat cut through the water with precision, the radar pinging intermittently as they neared the island. The crew was tense, each second feeling like an eternity as they dodged the floating mines. They knew the real danger lay just beneath the surface. After 10 long minutes of slow, careful maneuvering, they reached the island, their hearts pounding in relief. The crew climbed onto the shore, and the sound of the boat's engine faded as the island's dense, humid foliage closed in around them. The air was thick with the smell of earth and the oppressive weight of isolation. "Stay close," Caldwell ordered, his voice low but firm. They moved cautiously, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The island was eerily quiet, with no sounds except the rustle of leaves underfoot. Rodriguez was the first to spot a broken branch. "Someone's been through here recently," he said, his voice tinged with unease. The crew followed the trail, which led to a clearing. It was unsettlingly bare, save for a rusted cooking pot and a pile of ash that indicated a recent campfire. The sign of human presence in this wild, remote place sent a chill through Caldwell. "That's odd," Rodriguez said, a touch of concern in his voice. "They've been here," Caldwell nodded. "Let's keep moving." But as they continued through the dense underbrush, the atmosphere grew heavier and the hairs on the back of their necks stood up. They were no longer just dealing with a rescue mission. Something was wrong here, and it wasn't just the mines. Suddenly, figures burst from the trees, and the crew instinctively dropped into defensive positions. "What the hell?" Caldwell shouted, But before he could react, something struck him in the head. The world went black. When Caldwell regained consciousness, he was surrounded by flickering firelight and the dull ache of his injury. His crew was scattered around him, groaning and slowly coming to. Wooden shelters surrounded them and figures loomed nearby, silent and watching. His head throbbed as a man stepped forward, a tall figure with a commanding presence. The air was thick with tension. "We searched your belongings," the man said, his voice low and measured. "You're Captain James Caldwell." The man's words made Caldwell's pulse quicken. The crowd murmured at the mention of his name. "What's going on?" Caldwell demanded, still dazed. The man exhaled slowly, his face etched with weariness. "This was a mistake," the man said. "We thought you were someone else. We had to be sure before showing ourselves." Caldwell's mind raced. "Who did you think we were?" he asked. But the man didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured around the camp. "Let me explain," he said. "I'm Captain Argyle Johnson. We were the ones who sent that fishing boat." The words hit Caldwell like a tidal wave, and suddenly everything made sense. The boat with the fixed wheel, the desperate message, it had all been a plan. The fishing boat had been sent with the hope that someone would find it. "We've been stranded here for 2 months, Argyle continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. The crew around them had the same hollow, tired look, survivors of a desperate situation. Caldwell glanced around, still processing the gravity of the situation. "You came here on one boat?" Rodriguez asked, incredulous. Argyle nodded grimly. "We had 4 boats. One hit a mine and exploded. 2 others tried to push through but were destroyed. This last one barely made it. The isolation, the mines, the constant fear, it had been too much." "So why didn't you try to leave?" Rodriguez asked. Argyle's face hardened. "The last boat was low on fuel. We couldn't risk hitting another mine. We were stuck." The story was harrowing. For 2 months, Argyle and his crew had survived in isolation, with no way to signal for help. No radios, no flares, no contact with the outside world. They had been forgotten, stranded on this desolate island, until the fishing boat had finally reached Caldwell's crew. "We rigged the boat," Argyle explained. "We sent it out with the hope that someone would find it and trace it back to us. It was a long shot, but it worked." Caldwell looked around at the ragged camp, at the crew members who had endured so much. There were no supplies, no comfort, only the barest of shelters and a constant struggle to survive. "This island," Argyle said, his voice low, "is more than just an island. It's a depot, a hidden stop for traffickers." The realization struck Caldwell hard. This island wasn't just a random place. It was a hub for smuggling, and the crew had been caught in the middle. Argyle led them past the trees to a small, unguarded wooden hut. Inside they found contraband, precious metals and goods meant to be shipped off the island. "They've been using the mines to keep people away," Argyle explained, "to keep their operation hidden." It wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of criminal activity, of people willing to do whatever it took to keep their operation under wraps. Now that the truth was out, Caldwell knew they had to act fast. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The lifeboat was prepared, and the crew of stranded men was brought back to the Halcyon Tide. They were headed home, finally.